Good afternoon to those of you joining on Zoom, and good evening in Europe, and welcome if you're watching on YouTube. It's indeed a great honor and a pleasure for me to introduce Maximilliano Arrocet, Director at Amanda Levett Architecture, or ALA, based and headquartered in London. My name is Tom Verabas, Professor in Architecture in the School of Architecture and Design at NYIT. The format of the Beyond the Envelope series of events is a presentation by the architect on a specific project, followed by a student-led interview. I'm pleased to introduce here online Master of Architecture final year students Nidhi Gohel and Vishesh Patel, who are next to me, and they'll be on their own screen. And they'll be conducting an interview with Maximilliano following his presentation. Firstly, before introducing Maximilliano Arrocet, I would like to warmly thank Dean Perbolini for her support for this series of presentations and interviews titled Beyond the Envelope. Many thanks to David Diamond, Director of the Master of Architecture program here at New York Tech, for his support for a third year of this graduate seminar course, Beyond the Envelope, within which the series is set. This series of presentations and interviews really could not be launched without the important work of our Lectures and Events Committee, especially Committee Chair Athena Papadopoulou, Alessandra Mellis, and the invaluable administrative support of Susan Sternberg. Maximilliano Arrocet became a director of ALA in 2012, having joined the office in 2007. He led the design of the Museum of Art, Architecture and Technology, the MAAT project, as it will refer to it, in Lisbon, and the design of Maggie's Center in Southampton. He is currently leading the design for a first magnetized target fusion facility in the world for General Fusion, a Canadian energy firm replicating the process that powers the sun and the stars to transform how the world can be energized. He also leads the design of Pitch, a new concept for inner city stackable football pitches, or in American inner city soccer fields. Maximilliano studied architecture at the University of Bath, the University of Hong Kong, and Westminster University. Maximilliano has a strong understanding of construction techniques and materiality, which is channeled into his position and passion for researching and applying construction technologies, and his expertise in bespoke, contemporary, and historic detailing. The project in focus, as I mentioned in today's presentation and interview, is ALA's Museum of Art, Architecture and Technology, or MAAT, in Lisbon. In his presentation, Maximilliano will address a series of questions such as, can we create buildings that put people at the heart of cultural landmarks? Can we use materiality to root a building in its unique culture and environment and place? And what happens when architecture goes beyond the client's brief? Taking a close look at MAAT, the Museum of Art, Architecture and Technology in Lisbon, Maximilliano's presentation will explore architecture's evocative power, its potential for bringing communities together, and the dialogue between public spaces, materiality, and constructive ingenuity. We'll be shown how the MAAT project stages dynamic material effects with the rippling reflective texture of ceramic tiles and the complex surface of its facade for responding to the ambient conditions of different seasons and times of year, varied weather conditions, and at different times of day. The MAAT creates extensions of public urban surfaces, integrating what Le Corbusier called the fifth facade, a public occupiable roof surface, making a new civic space for Lisbon, which connects to the urban ground of the city. Join me, please, to warmly welcome to New York Tech, Maximilliano Arrocet.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Tom. And actually, when the proposal came, I really resonated with the title of the lecture series, Beyond the Facade. In many ways, this project is an exercise in messaging beyond, the power of architecture to message beyond just a building in itself. And I think the message here, it it has several dimensions, and I like starting with this aerial photograph. This is an aerial photograph that was taken a couple of years before we got the commission. This is the site that we were commissioned to do a project, and it's south facing. You can see already the reflections in the river. That the light quality is extraordinary, and we had a very unique condition in several ways. One is that the city, Lisbon, has been detached from the river for over 100 years. So you can see that not only the rail tracks disconnect this old part of the city called Belém, and there's literally no way to get to the riverfront. And at the time, there was one bridge was maybe 200 meters along towards the right, and there was no bridge. You know, you had to walk maybe 3-4 kilometers down the left. So there was this, you know, unique and magnificent kind of exposure to a river that the people from Lisbon couldn't really appreciate. The building, the existing building, is a historic building. It used to be the Museum of Electricity, which belongs to our client, which is EDP, which is the biggest electrical company in Portugal. And our brief was very loose. They said they wanted to do a museum of architecture, technology, arts, but they didn't have a collection. So what they wanted is they wanted a space that could give back to the city, and so we started to imagine what we could do. This was one of the first photo montages that we did, and the photo montage, you know, spoke already about our intentions, which were, well, we didn't really want to create an architecture that would compete with a historic building that we had on site, and we thought it was very important to treat the building nearly like a topography. But at this stage, there was still something lacking, and let me just continue so that I can explain our thought process. As we started looking at the project as a topography, it was clear to us that we had to create two areas, a diversity of public spaces. One which was elevated, and that could give you extraordinary views to the river, but also back to the city. But more importantly, we also knew that you know, it gets pretty hot in Lisbon, so we needed to create an area of shade, an area where people would just slow down as they were walking, as they were walking beside the river. And it was some of these diagrams would start to help us understand what we were trying to achieve, and some of the things were very abstract. So, you know, how could we capture the light? What was the relationship with the water? There was a clear relationship with views that we wanted to address, of connecting to the other side of the river, but also back to the city. And clearly there was an issue about circulation. We needed to connect the river not only from the top, you know, not only along the riverfront, but also back to the city. And so we started identifying, you know, how this could start to manifest itself, and we started looking at the different levels and in the different geometries, and how we thought that the public could start using this. And this is before we even started thinking about how the interior of the museum was actually going to express itself. This was one of the images that we did at the very beginning. There was kind of the vision of perhaps having an outdoor amphitheater that could be even projecting back to the city, and we could have outdoor cinemas in summer. And you can see at the bottom, at a different level, that there's a binoculars where you can actually see into the gallery. And some of these images were still very abstract, and we were trying to understand how to make this a reality, a project that really would consolidate and would create a new public place and bring this area to a different dimension in that sense. And I highlight here in pink because at some point we realized that the project would not work unless we could make a direct connection using a footbridge to the city. So that meant that from the city, at same grade as you were navigating down the little streets of Belém, you could walk up to an elevated platform. And this was really key. And we had to convince both. We had to convince the city, and we had to convince the client. You know, that we at some point we had to go back to the client and tell them, look, I know that you haven't asked for a footbridge, and probably it will make the limited budget that we have even more limited, but we do actually need to try and do this. So the photomontage then evolved, and then they started to make sense. They started to really not only connect, not only start to create a river walk with that would have a river walk that would connect the city from north to south, but also we would have a direct connection to Belém. So this is an image of the building when it was nearly complete, and I like showing this elevation because many times as architects we try to build as high as we can, and in this case we did completely the opposite. You can see the neighboring building, which was a historic building. We probably could have built up to the apex of the building, so we could have added maybe 6-7 meters to the building, but we didn't want to do that, and we didn't want to do that for several reasons. One of them is because we the neighbors behind in Belém, they had a view to the river that we didn't want to be an obstacle for. But we also it was critical to maintain that height so that we can actually have ramps to be able to access from the river up to that elevated amphitheater or square. These are images already of the project completed, and you can see how when you're at the rooftop, you don't really understand that there is a building underneath you. You access this public space. You can see the views towards the bridge, and this is how people started to occupy the space. So I think one of the successes of the project is it's been emotionally, it has connected with the people of Lisbon. It's a place where they can go and see the sunrise and the sunset. And there's something very particular about being able to see the sunrise and the sunset, a place where you can see it as part of a larger community. And the steps truly act as an amphitheater. And in this case, when you're not looking towards the river, you're actually looking back at the city, and you have these beautiful views of the palace. And here you can see some of the, this is kind of like the experience that you have. So you're elevated in somehow the building connects in both directions. So it's a virtual roundabout, if you want it from a visual perspective. So this plane was very important, and in this picture from a drone, you can actually see how the bridge connects into one of the main streets in Belém, and how it suddenly all starts to make sense, and how now the city starts to reconnect down to the river, and it has truly activated that part of the riverfront. And so this leads to the next topic that I wanted to touch today, which is great. So we did a topography. You don't really understand there's a building underneath you. The materiality comes from you. Well, you can see it in the images. It's a green, it's a green roof that then uses the same stone that is used throughout Lisbon. So it's two variations of stone. One is called moleanos, and the another stone is called it's nearly a marble called lioche stone, and the rest of the city is covered with the stone. So it's a natural material to use when you want to highlight that it's a public space. So the choice of materials in this case, I think, was fairly easy. This is an image of the bridge, and this is a picture of the opening day, and we actually rented a boat, and we couldn't believe our eyes when we saw how many people actually went to the opening of the museum, and how they occupied the building exactly how we had imagined it. And it was truly a special moment for the office in that sense, because sometimes you project how you think people are going to behave, and you work so hard into trying to create public spaces, but it's not an exact science, and it's difficult to measure in many ways, and sometimes you really need to understand the local the locals and what they expect. And in this case, most of these people they're not international kind of audience coming to the museum. They're actually people from Lisbon, particularly because at this stage there was no collection. So literally they just went to see an opening of a building with no art collection at this point. This is a picture of one of the footbridges that we had close to it, and they actually had to close the footbridge because so many people wanted to access. And the reason why this happened is because when the building was opened, the footbridge came 6 months later. So the building existed without the footbridge for 6 months, and this was one of the cause and effect of not having the footbridge in place. So this reinforced our notion that yes, we did need a new footbridge. Many times I get questions about the geometry of the building and how was the geometry derived, and it's not always apparent because it's unless you explain it. But the building that was not derived as a gesture from a traditional old-fashioned kind of gesture of an architect saying I want to do this kind of curvature. The geometry of the building was carefully calculated using a sun path diagram in the solar movement. And what we did is we created software that would allow us to understand the shadows. So we would draw all the shadows, and we started sculpting shadows. And so the public space that at the level of the Riverwalk, we wanted to create an area of shade. We wanted to create an area that was cooler than other areas, so that people would naturally, even if they were not interested in the museum itself, what was happening inside the museum, we were interested in people that would be walking along the riverfront and suddenly found an oasis of shade. And we thought that would be enough for people to pause, and then there's an oculus that I'll show you later on. People can actually see into the gallery, and then hopefully they will go inside the building. And so the geometry was really, as I said, based on the orientation of the building. It's south facing, so by having that horizontal overhang, then you create shade, and then in that area of shade, we started sculpting shade if you want, and then that's where we decided the entrance had to be. And to generate the geometry, we used, you can see a blue dot at the top, which is the tip of the building if you want, and then a magenta dot, which is at the base, at the entrance of the building. And the entrance of the building is elevated because the river can flood. So we had to go, the entrance of the building had to be at a certain height to avoid, the potential flooding of the area. And so this is just to show you, this would be the line, the blue line that I was showing you before. And one of the challenges that we had is, well, we had a very limited budget. So the building was, the budget for the building was approximately 20 million euros, which ended up being around 2,800 per square meter, which is very low for an international kind of museum. So we were very limited, and we knew from the start that we had to come up with a facade solution that had to be simple, yet we wanted to capture so many aspects of the light quality and the reflection of the river, and so our journey starts with understanding what's the easiest way to fabricate or to generate this geometry. So it was evident from the beginning that we had to create a ruled surface, and the ruled surface would allow us then to just using a series of straight lines, which I will show later, then it would allow us to then come up with a tiling system that would probably help us articulate everything that we wanted to do. Once we generated the ruled surface, we realized that construction is not precise, so we had to start looking at what were the deviations that we might get, and also we have a steel structure and a concrete structure, so they move slightly differently. So we had to start thinking about the gap. The gap between the tiles was fundamental in this case, and understanding that there may be a gap bigger at the top and smaller at the bottom, and how to start mediating all of these differences that we might start getting as we were started to look at the different elements that different geometries that we could generate. The other thing that we understood is that the pink areas in this diagram are areas that actually the pattern is quite aligned, while the blue areas are the areas where there's a transition, where the ruled surface is more pronounced, if you want, and so that there was going to be a deviation in the pattern. And we actually enjoyed that. We thought that would be great because that meant that we could provide the tiling of the facade could start to perhaps mimic what the reflections of the water. And so we opted, at the end, we opted for a hexagonal pattern. The hexagonal, obviously, it's based on, you can break down the hexagon into equilateral triangles. We did study the option of doing triangular breakdowns, so using an equilateral triangle. But at the end, we opted for breaking the hexagon in half and doing an asymmetrical hexagon, a three-dimensional shape that would also allow us to play with the edge. And so we worked quite hard into trying to come up with a system that would allow us to map a complex geometry, but only using 3 tiles. So we didn't have, we didn't have the budget to just do, 1,000 different tiles. We had a budget to maybe produce 3 molds. And so in this case, what you see here is you see 3 types of tile. The blue tile is a 3-dimensional tile, which has around 65 millimeters in the depth of the tile. There's a gray transition tile that goes from a 3-dimensional tile to then a yellow tile, which is a completely flat tile. And they're in the blue tile and the gray tile are manufactured in a similar way, which I will show you in a bit. But in the yellow tile, it's a cheaper tile and it's manufactured using an extrusion mold, which I will show you in a second. The next question that we started asking ourselves is, well, we need movement in this facade because we knew that there were going to be discrepancies in actually the tolerances between the different elements of the facade. So we wanted to exaggerate the three-dimensionality of the facade. Also, because of the orientation of the building, each tile nearly acts as a solar dial. You can map the shadows, and they create completely different options. So this is a test that we did using, how 3-dimensional do we want the tiles, and we opted for the third option, which is the one to the right, which were the most extreme kind of tile. So then the question is, well, okay, well, how do we make these tiles? And that was a journey that lasted for 2.5 years. So we immediately thought of ceramic tiles because most of the vertical pyramids in the city of Lisbon are in ceramic. So there's a very strong relationship to the city and using ceramics. And actually, ceramics behave very well in this kind of environment. And ceramics is a universe in itself. So the first thing we decided is that we needed a non-porous ceramic. So instead of going for terracotta, we went for a stoneware, which is, if you want, in between it's terracotta, stoneware, and then you have porcelain. So stoneware is still a ceramics that is vitrified, so it's in the kiln at around 1,200 degrees Celsius, and that goes through a process of vitrification, which means that it's a non-porous ceramic. So unlike where you would find terracotta, it's non-porous, and it's important that it's non-porous because it does actually freeze. You can actually get the odd day in Lisbon where it goes below 0, and then any humidity trapped in the terracotta could actually make the tiles crack. So it was important to use a non-porous material. And so we found, we searched everywhere in Portugal, and we couldn't find a company that had the knowledge to create tiles of the dimensions that we wanted to create them, because it was important for us to have an oversized tile because of the scale of the building. So we ended up working with a Spanish company, so neighbor to Portugal, with a Spanish company that was a family-run business, 4th generation, and they still to this day produce a lot of the ceramics used in the Sagrada Familia. So following Gaudi's kind of a tradition of ceramics. So they had this true knowledge about the material and about what they could do with it. So this is a picture of one of the molds, the 3-dimensional tile molds that we created. And the fabrication process that you can see here is we ended up having to use a stamping method. So there's a male-female mold, and then the the clay, if you want, is stamped, and this is more or less what you get. And what was interesting to us is that we realized very quickly that when we left it drying, we put in the kiln, this would deform. Obviously, we then had to come up with a system to support the tile. So we had to create another type of ceramics, in this case, a porous ceramics that you was used as a support. So we would first stamp the tile, then we put it on top of one of these supports, and then it would go into the kiln, and then we would fire it. So these are some of the pictures of the molds that we use to create these three-dimensional tiles. And let me see if the video worked. And this was quite a fun process, which is as soon as they came out of the kiln, they threw waters of cold water, and the reason why we did this was because we realized that we could create a crackled effect. So and so we experimented with changes in temperature to see what would happen to the ceramics, and I'll show you in a second the effect that we get. This one is the flat tile, the yellow one that I showed you, and this one is produced slightly differently. You have a mold, you apply the clay goes at with a certain pressure, and then it just effectively is extruded. And then we had a cookie mold, if you want, that would just stamp it. And so these are the two type of tiles that we had. And these are some of the mock-ups that we did just to start experimenting with different tonalities, different qualities that we could find. We were quite certain from the beginning that we wanted a white tile, but the client wanted us to explore other tonalities. So a lot of these tests were basically to demonstrate to the client that the quality of the light that we could get with the white tile was a lot more interesting, because it would simply reflect what was happening around us, while by adding any other tonality that in all of these tones are kind of, you can see in the buildings behind, a lot of these tones are just kind of colors that are recurrent in this area of the city. So all of these mock-ups were just to demonstrate to the clients that our instincts were correct. Sometimes you need to go the long route until you kind of find the right solution. And here you can see a wide range of different tests to understand what white we wanted to achieve and what kind of different type of reflection. Again, these are three different options. One was a white that was similar to the stone that is used in the pavements in the city, around the city, and the other one was using a dark clay with a white glaze. And ultimately, after all of these tests, we opted for this one. And the reason why we chose this one is, one, because it was the type of it was white, or it's off-white, but it was slightly earthy, so it did have a dialogue with the stone that is used in the pavement. But what we really enjoyed was this crackle effect. And when the light hits it, and because it's south-facing, as soon as you get close to it, you can start understanding that there's different depth in the ceramic. And this is something quite unique that it's difficult to achieve with any other material. Every piece looks like it's handmade, and we thought that was very interesting. And there's something that I think that is quite fascinating about also accepting the fact that the tiles are not perfect, that there's small imperfections about them. It creates a certain richness in the project. It was important as well for the tiles. We had to go through extensive testing for this system because effectively the tiles started vertically, as they do in any kind of facade, but then the building was twisting, and therefore it was acting nearly more like a soffit. So then we had to stop it from. We had to make sure that in case there was a breakage of one of the tiles, that it didn't just fall on someone's head. So this is a fiberglass backing that we needed to add to the back of every tile. And this is one of the mock-ups on the system, how we decided, we did different tests on how the tiles could be mechanically fixed to the aluminum structure behind it. And this was the most successful one. So this is the one that we ended up pursuing at the end. And there's an added complexity to the project, which is one that we had to deal with the different rhythms of the building, which I will explain in a second. So we have a primary structure, which you can see here. So there's a big kind of three-dimensional truss structures running north-south, and then we have a secondary element which picks up which is an aluminium element which picks up the facade. The blue arms are of different lengths, and then we would hang the tiles. So if you were to continue the sketch in a photograph, this was the system, and I will I won't dwell too much, not to bore you, but basically the tiles had to move in the areas where the ruled surface was at its most extreme. We actually had to rotate the tiles as well. So everything had to basically move in every plane. So I think it's easier to show you in photographs. So this is the rhythm of the steel structure. We managed to create a building that effectively has no columns, and the way that we achieve this is we have you see a concrete wall here. That concrete wall is part of an elliptical concrete structure which forms one of the big elliptical room that is the main room of the museum. And then you can see here we had some trusses that were spanning to a tilted arch. So these are temporary structures. These were removed later on. And then from that tilted arch, you would have an overhanging structure that would allow us to have that kind of big overhang that I will show you in a second. The rhythm of the facade was every 6 meters. So then then we would use straight steel sections every 6 meters, and that created a deviation between the original surface that we wanted to follow, the ruled surface, and the steel structure. So then we used. I like when this is a very low tech way of making sure that you can build a facade in a complex geometry. But we basically use those aluminum panels that you see at the top here. We laser cut these, and they had the perforations at the right rhythm, and then we literally use strings to make sure that the ruled surface was following what we had designed in 3D. So these red lines were red strings. The red strings meant that, yeah, that's correct. So a red string meant that it was, when the red string was pulled, it meant that that's the geometry that you had to follow. And the black aluminium extrusions basically follow the red lines. So that way we could check before the tiles were installed, we could check the positioning of the tiles. And then once we went through this process, then installing the tiles was actually really quick. And then the tiles at the top, you can see, are flat. They were cut on site. So we would take a measurement, they were oversized, and then we would cut the measurement so that we could then follow the curvature as precisely as we possibly could. We used different, in our office, we've adopted all sorts of technologies. We write our own script, we make models. We really use every tool that we have in our hand to assist us, not just in the design, but also in the construction. So unlike many design offices, we generally are very proactive, and we follow construction throughout. So we're usually on site as well as construction is a fundamental part for us. And here you can see some pictures of the tiles as they were installed. And I like this diagram because it's a diagram that we did, and it's not 100% scientific, but we developed the diagram by simply just being on site and observing what was happening to the light. And we traveled to the city for 7 years. So we, by the end of the 3rd, 4th year, we had a really good appreciation of the colors that we were getting. And there was this 6-degree angle, which was the golden hour that happened in the mornings and in the evenings. And then there was a moment where the sun went below the horizon, but you still got this blue tint. this very bluish facade, and then it was nighttime, and then you would have the daytime. And so I think these photographs just kind of demonstrate that we were able to capture, all of these different colors, and it's just effectively mimicking the same behavior that the water has. It just starts picking all the colors of the sky. And sometimes people pass different times of the day, and I've received calls from friends and, oh, I saw the museum, it's great. I love that you did an orange building. And I tell them, no, the building is white. It's just that, you happen to be there at a specific time. And other people tell me, it's a beautiful silver building, or, it just really changes. And I think the project was quite successful. We tried to capture what the river did, and we found a way of capturing all that kind of the qualities that you get. It's difficult to explain scale of this project because it's a very long project, and I like this picture because by putting the child walking and some people sitting, you can understand that the oversized tile is important. It's important to have a tile. The usually Portuguese tiles at the biggest are maybe 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters, and here we were talking about making a changing the scale that you would find anywhere in the city. I like to put this image because it was completely unexpected, but one of the artists realized that the ceramic tiles actually made sound, so they used the facade as a xylophone, and I thought that was very interesting. So a lot of one of the artists decided to do a musical intervention using the facade, which I thought was great. And then another element that we didn't really design, but it just happened: the geometry that follows the sun at a specific point act as acoustic reflectors. And there's moments where you're going up the ramp to go towards the entrance, and you can actually hear the water in a very peculiar way. Another aspect that we wanted to do is again, use the facade as in those light qualities that you saw, and how could we bring that into the museum. So this is a picture of the only moment that we allow sunlight to go into the museum, which is in winter, and then after that we stop the sun going in because of the solar gain. But you can see that this is a picture taken from the gallery looking up. So this is the connection between being inside the museum and being able to connect to the outside. You're underground, which is also a bit disorientating. So it's very important to have this kind of visual connection to the outside. So this is one of the galleries of the museum. And I won't dwell too much on the museum inside. There's different areas that are effectively an extension of the topography, and there's this huge kind of oval space which is used for all types of exhibition. It's very malleable. It's a type of space that they didn't have in the city, so it's unique, and artists have appropriated this space. And if you go into the Instagram page of the MAAT, you'll see that they've used it in ways that we couldn't even have imagined. So I think it's been quite successful. And I think this is end of my presentation. Hopefully I've covered most of the questions or that you had about the project. So yeah, if you want to go and ask it now, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maximiliano. This was an incredible presentation and great insights into the project, far beyond what is published, and really great that you could join us today. Thank you also for your generosity to join us for the interview. So I'll introduce Nidhi Gohel and Vishesh Patel. I'll turn my mic off and they'll turn theirs on.
Hi, my name is Nidhi. My name is Nidhi Manish Gohel and my partner Vishesh Patel. We would really thank you for your fantastic presentation of the MAAT project and others at Amanda Levitt Architecture. So going now to the questions. The first question we would like to start with. So the project being located on the edge of Tagus River in Lisbon's Belém district, the MAAT project is the focus of EDP Foundation's master plan for an art campus on the riverfront, creating a unique locale from which to capture views of all of Lisbon. So the question is, in reconnecting the city to the waterfront, can you summarize the way in which this project repairs gaps and distinctions between the center of Lisbon and the waterfront? In general, what was MAAT project conceived in the larger context as an agent of urban regeneration?
Hello?
Sure, that's a great question. So Belém is not really considered the center of Lisbon. You can, if you look at the map, the center of the city is where the Plaza de Comercio is. Plaza Comercio, effectively where trade happens, so where all the ships would, the main ports, the main trading area. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Can hear you. Can you?
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Sorry, I don't know. I think I got cut off, so I will respond again. I'm not sure how much you. Okay. So what I was saying is that yeah, we can hear you. What I was saying before is that the Belém is not really close to the center of the city. The center of the city is considered where there is the Plaza de Comercio. And the city used to be connected to the riverfront, all the way from the Plaza de Comercio to Belém. The big one that the city had when we started working on the project was a disconnection to the riverfront throughout the full extent. So it was only really touching the River Tagus at the Plaza de Comercio. So this was one of the many projects that the city of Lisbon had in mind to reconnect back to the river. So we were another stone. So there's a series of projects that go from Plaza de Comercio, including the expo. If you go to the city, so from the expo and to the Comercio, a lot of new projects that have been since completed that have actually been able to regenerate and route the back to the river. We were definitely helped reconnect the area of Belém and the riverfront. And beside us, there's not just the MAAT museum, but there's also Museo de Coches, which is one of the new museums by Mendes da Rocha. So I think in some project was critical in reconnection of the city. So, but it was one of many projects. The city had a called the Arco Ribeirinho, which means the Arch of the River, and it very much promoted, all projects to do something similar to what we did. So I think I could say that we're a success story, and I think there was other success stories, and I think really the municipality of Lisbon and the mayors of Lisbon have done a great job in regenerating the city.
Thank you. So in urban design terms, the site is informed at once by a device of the space of flows as both a civic destination and also by its infrastructural role for people to move through and traverse the city. How has the city been extended by the MAAT intervention? How has the MAAT project created a community?
I think that as I was saying before, it's very difficult to capture the imagination of a whole city, and somehow the MAAT has been able to do that. And I think one of the reasons that it's been successful, it's because, as I said, it's a place where you can see sunrise and sunset, and somehow that there's something magical about that. There's something that I think probably, this is rooted in there's something very deep about seeing the sunrise and the sunset in a place where you can do it as a community, and I think that's one of the secrets of the success of the project. As I said, I think shade has also been a fundamental part of the project to create true public space, because people in Lisbon really look for shade certain times of the year. So I think that having an elevated platform in front of the river is unique. It gives you a vantage point that you don't usually have. So it's a mixture between the unique lighting conditions and relationships that you have with the sun, the vantage point of the upper public space, the fact that we did it as an amphitheater so people could sit down and actually they have done outdoor cinema nights in summer, so I think that that's been really successful. And I do think that having an area that is cooler and that provides shade has been fundamental.
How does the site attract crowd, and how does the MAAT building instigate activity, and what different kinds of uses and events which are enabled by the civic surfaces of the MAAT site?
Actually, I think part of the success of this building is that it doesn't need to be programmed to be successful. No one programs. You don't need someone to actively program things on the MAAT for people to go there. People just go there because it effectively acts like a three-dimensional roundabout. So if you're in the riverfront and you want to go to Belém, you have to go through the roof, because when you're in Belém, you want to the riverfront, you have to go through there. And because, as I said before, suddenly you find yourself in an amphitheater, suddenly you find the places of comfort, places of urban comfort. And as soon as people start gathering in this place, just because it's comfortable and so on, it immediately creates community. I think it's a pretty hot. I think it's a hotspot for skaters as well. I think skaters love it, and I think probably they're being chased off. But I've definitely seen skaters and people cycling up and down the facility. But I think the success is that you don't need to program it. The MAAT, however, has had different artists having interventions outside. So, for example, if you see in the image here, you see a floor box. The floor box is there because we knew that they might want to put a pop-up bar, or they wanted to do an art installation. So there is the possibility of actually having art installations, and they have had art installations. And obviously, when there's an art installation, then it attracts people. But as I said, I think the fundamental success of the building is that it doesn't need programming to be occupied.
Thank you. How do you see the agency of transformative new architecture to regenerate cities? And did you expect the extent of reactivation of this part of the city?
No, we didn't. I mean, you always dream that you're going to be able to regenerate a part of a city and that it's going to be, successful in this sense. And so, I mean, yes, I mean, we're incredibly happy about how people have really, the people from Lisbon have really adopted this as a new cultural hub for them, and I think that's really important. And I think the language that the language of this building can only be in Lisbon. I think the solar path that gives you the curvature of the building is only possible in Lisbon, because it's unique to its location. The materials are exactly the same materials that are used everywhere throughout in the city. The use of ceramics, all the buildings surrounding us have the same idea, that all the vertical elements of architecture are in ceramics. So I think the architecture of this particular project can only be in Lisbon. So I think that's also part of the success. Is yes, it's contemporary architecture, but it's deeply rooted in its location.
This master plan includes the adaptive reuse of the Central Tejo Power Station, as well as a new museum project in which an abstract contemporary space was created. It is rare for an architectural commission to include both a strikingly new piece of architecture and the adaptive reuse of a disused industrial building. Can you share us how you developed the difference in architectural language and expression between the renovation and transformation of the disused power plant inherited from the Industrial Revolution and the new building of the MAAT?
Yeah. Well, first, let me be very clear. We didn't take part in the refurbishment of the existing building. We were part. I mean, obviously, we had conversations with the MAAT. It was a project that was happening in parallel, and obviously, we worked together as a team. Our brief evolved very much from an analysis of the types of spaces that they had in the existing building. Which were, mainly orthogonal, very good for a traditional kind of galleries and exhibitions. It was well lit in most occasions. Some rooms had no lighting, so they were good for multimedia exhibitions. So the brief for the extension of the building, which actually hides a substation. Most people don't know that our building actually hides an existing substation. So I think it's important that to understand that the brief developed alongside the existing building, and the type of spaces that we generated were to complement what was existing. And also we had interviews with different artists, and we understood that there was a need for a space for artists to occupy and make their own. So there is a symbiosis, if you want, in the type of spaces that we generated.
Thank you. MAAT explores contemporary culture through exhibitions in the disciplines of visual art, new media, architecture, technology, and science. Museums are often conceived with the promise for the benefits of their host city. Ultimately, can the impact of this architectural project upon its host city be characterized as the Bilbao effect? Or in other words, has the MAAT had a transformative effect upon Lisbon, serving to attract large number of tourists and citizens?
I don't think it's quite the Guggenheim effect. I think Lisbon already had a very healthy Lisbon was really quite attractive to go to Bilbao. When Bilbao and the Guggenheim, Bilbao was a regional city of great industrial importance, but most people outside Spain didn't really know of Bilbao. So the Guggenheim was transformative in a different way. The Guggenheim also has, the Guggenheim, they have a collection of incredible art, while in this building in particular, there is no collection. So they don't have a collection of art. So this is more transformative at a public space level. It's more transformative about redefining what public space is in a city. It has definitely attracted huge numbers to come and visit, but I think the situations are slightly different. I think this is also a success story, but it's a success story at different levels. I think the as I said, the Guggenheim was very important for the city as an attractor, and this is much more of a way of redefining what public space is within the city.
While the massing of MAAT project can be read as a low-key and subtle due to its low profile and height, yet the MAAT is also an abstract, even radical building in how it endorses contemporaneity or the new. How do you feel about calling this a piece of architecture iconic?
Well, that's a difficult question. I don't think it's for us to define it in that way. I think we generally ALA is there's a certain negative connotation to iconic architecture, and we very much try to you know, when we think of projects, not think in that term, that whether it will become an icon or not. I mean, unavoidably, when you create a project of this dimensions, and it ultimately does become a symbol, and people do recognize it as perhaps as an icon, but it's not the way that we kind of perceive architecture. I think well, time will tell. Hopefully, I think it is ingrained. I think it's definitely one of the symbols of the city, and I think yeah, only time can tell. But yeah, the word or the terminology iconic architecture, we're very careful to use it. We don't use it. We don't use it to define our own architecture, for sure.
Our next question concerns the spatial organization of the MAAT. The surface organization creates the urban potential, as you have published, to walk over, under, and through the museum complex from the urban ground and waterfront to the elevated civic space on the roof. This spatial maneuvers serve to involute urban public spaces into the interior of the museum, sunken 6 meters below grade. Can you explain how the interior of the building captures the flow of urban population?
Yes, and I apologize because I actually didn't. I didn't bring any slides to show you the how it. So I'm going to have to describe it for you. The whole project is it's a complex network of ramps, right? So that we have ramps to go to the top of the building. We have ramps to then go. So there's different levels. The main level, so you have the level of the Riverwalk, and then you have a level which is above the Riverwalk, which is a level that where we had to establish the entry of the museum, which is elevated to avoid potential floods from the river. And then once you get to that level, then we slowly start ramping people down. And you ramp people down, and you have an option to go in two directions, and that's where the big oval kind of space starts. And as you go on the perimeter of this oval shape, one is a very long ramp that takes you to the back of the oval, to the opposite side of the oval, and the other one is a generous kind of stepped kind of area. Once you're in the oval, then there's different connection point to different parts of the building, but all these spaces are hyper connected, if you want, and it's, before you know it, you're in a different level because we're using ramps. So the idea was to create this interconnected spaces that could be used in different ways. So the museum itself can be split into, be used into different modes depending on what the artists want to do, and that kind of organic flow of how spaces move along each other, and then that lead you back to the entry point and then lead you outside. We've really always looked at it as part of the continuation of what's happening outside. So inside and outside are actually flowing, if you want. And we wanted just to have an air curtain, but we didn't manage to convince the museum that that was a good idea, and also it was incredibly expensive just from an energy perspective. But our ideal solution would have been not even to have a door, just so that you could walk in and out of the museum. But the practicalities didn't allow that to happen.
How did you determine the final form, topography, and surface organization of exterior civic spaces? And related to this, please tell us why the gallery level was designed to be sunken 6 meters below the ground.
So the gallery level if I put back the elevation that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, it's the best way of explaining why the gallery was hung. It all has to do with the ramps, really, and what we were trying to achieve. So if I put this elevation, you can understand it. The different levels of the building. So that's the maximum level that we could achieve by turning this ramp. So if you're disabled, this is a long route that you can take to go all the way up. And when you land, the bridge also helps you to the bridge and the square at Belen are at that kind of level. So we were really limited as to how high this could be. Again, we also had the other condition was like we didn't want to be an obstacle for some of these buildings to have a visual connection to the city. So our only option was to go underground, which was very complex because obviously we were in a reclaimed land and we were underneath it was complicated from a construction perspective. But we really thought that the success of the building was the success of the building. The building would only be successful if we managed to maintain this external ramps at this kind of different slope. So the geometry of the building is really generated by a very, very long and intense period of exploration of flow diagrams and accessibility. And then the final touch to that kind of complex pathworks and geometries was the movement of the sun. So I'm quite confident to say that this was completely generated by human flow patterns and by the movement of the sun.
Can you share your screen again, like disconnected and connected again? The slides are not properly showing.
We didn't see the section or elevation as you were talking about it. It's still on the roof kind of drone shot.
Can you see it now?
It's a blank.
No, not yet.
It's not. It's saying it's starting to screen share, but it's not up yet. Maybe it's the internet connection. Well, we can go forward.
No, not yet.
No.
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 That's okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, geez, internet connection is not great.
So
If I, okay. Yeah, I apologize. I'll try to do it again. Okay.
It seems to be slow to.
So can you hear me?
We can. It's still trying to share, so maybe it's the internet connection is. That's okay. Okay,
Yeah,
now
now
we see the elevation or the photo of the.
Okay.
or we would like
I see.
to now focus.
Okay, that took a while. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, so you can see here the, as I was saying before, the maximum,
Should I continue?
I think so.
Yeah, you can.
We would
yeah,
we
please.
like now to
Yeah.
focus on the ways in which the MAAT creates dynamic and differentiated material effects in how we experience, perceive, and interact with the exterior surfaces. In particular, the ceramic cladding of the riverside elevation and the canopy stages different reflections of color in different seasons and times of the years, varied weather conditions, and different times of the day. Please, can you share the decision making to use the ceramic tiles in this project? And has the success of this material and visual effects helped to develop more general methods with which to apparent and interact with the daylight and ambient conditions to create material effects, ultimately which can be applied to other projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think I covered that during the lecture. Ceramics is a wonderful material because it allows you to implement, play with different textures, depths, with the different glazes, and even when you decide to use white, there's there's no such thing as white. The explorations that we did with the material, adding different minerals to it and having different qualities, it's pretty unique. I mean, there's also a sustainability narrative of using ceramics, and yeah, I think using white was definitely the right decision in the project. We definitely did this was a PhD in ceramics for us. We have learned a lot, and not only this project, but if you also research the project at the VNA in London and Maggie Center, and other projects that we're developing at the moment, I think we've adopted ceramics as one of our preferred kind of materials to be able to explore, different light qualities and even different kind of mechanical characteristics that we can get with it.
This project deploys architecture to use daylight as visual media. In our seminar, we had discussed Le Corbusier's famous statement, authored 100 years ago. Architecture is the masterly, correct, and magnificent play of masses brought together in light. Our eyes are made to see forms in light. Light and shade reveal these forms. Le Corbusier was referring to Platonic solids, spheres, and cubes, or planar surfaces, or pure forms, or Platonic solids, as he referred to the architectural form. The geometries of the MAAT project are dynamic and complex and not Platonic, prismatic, and pure forms. Can you characterize the distinction between the modernist notion of the behavior of light qualities on planar and smooth surfaces to the complex surfaces articulated with the rippling patterns of reflections created by the ceramic tiles on these surfaces?
I really like the quote. I do think I think it was very important for us to, when we were looking at the different geometries that we could use, I think what was critical and what I explained in the lecture is that really the key to success of this facade was generating it using a ruled surface. The qualities of the ruled surface means that you can actually build it using a series of straight lines, if you want, and between two straight lines, then you can connect two straight lines that are different kind of planes using equilateral triangles. And the equilateral triangle can then obviously, the hexagon is decomposed into equilateral triangles. And when we decided to make the shape three-dimensional instead of planar, that gave us the opportunity to use a hexagon split in half and made three-dimensional. So I think the fundamental of how you look at light and how it plays with Platonic solids, for example, is actually in a way, the way that we perceive Platonic solids. Most of the Platonic solids is the base kind of geometry is the equilateral triangle as well. So we're not really far off I don't think there is such thing about modern geometry and classic geometry. I think geometry is a universal language that we have. We probably have now tools that allow us to explore things with more complexity, but I don't really see much difference in the appreciation that they had perhaps 100 years ago in how light plays with geometry and how light plays in geometry that we did in the MAAT. I mean, I personally think that we probably should go back to studying a lot more classic geometry and architecture, but that's a different story.
Can you please summarize again the flow and movement of the sun path over a day, and how the large overhanging canopy at the waterfront has been designed to create shade and civic space in the hot summer months?
I am not sure if you are seeing what I'm sharing. Are you seeing what I'm sharing? I'm sharing the diagram with shadow, with projected shadows. Is that what you're seeing? Okay. Yeah. So so the top line is if you were to project the building, so that's the entrance. The pink line here is the line of what we call the oculus. So that big kind of skylight, if you want, that connect the gallery to the inside and to the outside. So this is a projection of those elements. And what you can see here is the different projections of the shadows at different times of the year. So we have winter solstice, the 2 equinox, and then we have the solar solstice. And you see how the shadows kind of project differently. So the entrance, the entrance is to the left, where where you see the projection of these shadows, and obviously the sun goes around, but we also were taking into consideration when we thought people were going to be in the museum itself. So I would say that the whole front of the project was using shadows. So we were sculpting with shadows, if you want, which I think is quite a poetic way of understanding how we did it. And we used models, and ultimately we also used the assistance of even early virtual kind of reality goggles to try and understand and see what we could do. But it was truly sculpted using shadows.
Okay, so we would like to shift our discussion towards the space planning of the museum. ALA deployed the geometry of figure of an ellipse as a space planning device. Can you characterize the quality of spaces created, and can you explain how the flow of crowd interact with exhibition in this special elliptical spaces?
Yes. Yeah, so we had a lot of discussions on the geometry of the space. Part of it was to create a new type of gallery space that didn't exist in Lisbon. So we went and we analyzed all the museums that existed in Lisbon, and including all the spaces that they had in the existing building neighboring to us, the original Museum of Electricity. And there was a large number of orthogonal rooms with large volumes in museums close to us, and we tried to imagine what kind of space we wanted to create. And one of the things that was interesting to us is that when you're trying to generate an ellipse, you use 2 focus points, right? So there's two. So if you have a circle, you have obviously you have the center of the circle, and then with the radius you can derive the circle. But when you create an ellipse, you actually have 2 focus points. And one of the interesting things is that you actually enter the building at a slightly higher level. So I think, and as soon as you enter the building, then you start to ramp down into directions. And before you know it, you are actually you are circumnavigating the space around the ellipse, and you're experiencing the space at different heights. So you start at a higher vantage point, but by the time that you circulate around the ellipse, you are at the lowest point of the museum. And that was a very interesting quality to us because it meant that the artist could occupy that large volume and you can actually see it from different vantage points. And we thought that was very interesting. And after conversations with several artists, because this could be a really in base for different artists to look at different different objects in a place where they could actually occupy it and make it their own. So yeah, the rationale behind we tested many geometries, but the oval geometry was really an important one. I'm not sure if you can see my screen yet, but I've shifted to a slide that kind of shows how people are looking down at an art piece. So this was an artist intervention where they were dismantling some old fishing ships, and you can see how people are being, the art was happening at the lowest point of the museum, and then you could see how people were kind of gathered around the periphery of this oval shape, and you can see that there's different vantage points, and it plays with this notion of, in this case the artists were at the center, but many times it's the opposite, is the spectators, or the spectators becoming the art that are at the ground floor, and people can be looked at from above. So it was just trying to open different possibilities, spatial possibilities of what is a gallery space.
Can you share us with the distinction of electrical space planning and of galleries to a more traditional model of organizations of museum, in which series of boxes are arranged in a sequence?
So could you repeat that question again?
Can you share us? Yeah. Can you share us with the distinction of elliptical space planning of galleries to a more traditional model of organization of museums, in which series of boxes are arranged in a sequence?
I really apologize. I've missed the first 3 words of your question, so I don't want to answer something correctly. So if you could just tell me the first 3 words of your question, then I'll be able to answer.
It's like I'm asking for the distinction, like how is the elliptical space planning of your gallery is distinct from the more traditional ones, in which we have a sequence of boxes for the museum space?
Yeah. Yes, we didn't plan the elliptical space as a traditional gallery where we were imagining that people were going to use the walls to display. We really imagined it as a spatial exploration of that elliptical space, and we tried to imagine, particularly, the ellipse has 2 focus points, so we were imagining what would happen if an object was in the center. Where was the where were the visual lines going? In this case, we drew an ellipse that has two focus points that are relatively close to each other, and we just tested using different objects of different sizes and different configurations. And so the planning of the elliptical gallery was not done traditionally. We really explored all sorts of different configurations. And again, it's really good. If you go to the Instagram, for example, and you go at the MAAT museum page, you can see that the space, sometimes you can't even recognize the way that they've subdivided it, but it's all based on this kind of dual focus point. And I think it's been very successful. I think artists enjoy the space and they appropriate the space very well.
So for our next question concerns the relationship of MAAT project to the larger body work of ALA. further to a question presentation, can you share us with the genealogy of design of MAAT project within the body of work by ALA? Are there projects which led to this project, or as an earlier prototype which you had developed further?
So the MAAT and the VNA are siblings. They were developed at the same time. And although different people were working on different projects, all the directors, we work across all projects. So it's very difficult to understand, when one project influenced the other. There are two projects where we explored with ceramics as well, different ceramics. In that case, it was a porcelain, because the VNA has a huge collection of porcelain, and even in the interiors of VNA, you see, exquisite examples of porcelain-clad staircases, and it's a master class in ceramics as well. We also went underground at the VNA for completely different reasons, but we also excavated. So we effectively, the two projects were so there's a lot of parallels between one and the other. The language, the other parallel is that VNA could only be in London and for the VNA, in the same way that the language that we generated here in our eyes this architecture can only be in Lisbon, and it's very much rooted in the place. Both are rooted in the place, and sure. Then there's this, then we had, there's so many parallelisms between one and the other that it's difficult to know, as I said, which one influenced which and at what stage. I think they grew together. That's why I call them siblings. I think they grew together. Both the VNA extension and the MAAT were our two biggest projects for ALA. So they were very much the exploration of the architecture that evolved, and it started really marking the difference between future systems and we used to be future systems, and then we morphed into ALA. So I think there's definitely future systems still a huge influence in many of the things that we do. We basically, as an office, our root is future systems, but we have, with the VNA and the MAAT, we developed a different way of looking at architecture. And I think most of the projects that we do now in the office, I think probably still use MAAT and the VNA as the basis of our kind of I wouldn't say a language, because I think we rethink the architectural language every time we get a project, but definitely it gave us the courage to be to be strongly conceptual, and to believe in the narratives that we think are the right ones, and to not be fearful of rethinking models that seem to have been stagnated. So, for example, the museums, right? The way that we think of museums was stagnated for many years, and I think in both buildings we managed to push the boundaries of redefining what the spaces in a museum need to be. Similarly with public space, I think we've taken both cases very. We have been allowed in many ways to push boundaries of what public space is and how we should look at public space.
So the MAAT project was completed 7 years ago. Can you please share us with how the MAAT project, both as a museum and as an urban design project, has influenced the recent and current work of ALA? In broad terms, what's the impact of MAAT project on your practice and the more recent portfolio of work?
Well, the project that I've been working for the last 3.5 years is a fusion demonstration plant. So it's quite difficult to to find parallelisms. But actually, there are. The way that we approach materiality, it's always the same. Hopefully I'll get a chance to share that project with you in the near future, and I can give you if I'm invited again, I'll be happy to give a lecture on it. I think the way that we approach materiality, our exploration with materiality, understanding of sustainability, and understanding of how people flow through spaces, the MAAT gave us the confidence that our slightly alternative way of looking at things was successful. So it has definitely influenced in the way in the way that we think of design, but what we don't do is we don't replicate the type of architectural language that we developed for the MAAT. We will never do a project that has the same kind of architectural language, because, as I said, it's unique to this location in Lisbon. So the influence is at a very deep level, not at a superficial level.
This interview and the study of set of projects in Beyond the Envelope series of presentations and interviews are set within a Master of Architecture course here at NYIT. As such, your audience in this event and this interview are future architects. In this context, can you please share us from your point of view any advice you may have for the next generation of architects?
Yeah, I mean, I think we face a time of real change, and I think it's a time to be brave. It's a time to explore truly what public space means for our city. It's a time to challenge models that have been stagnated. It's the time, but it's also a time to reflect back on some of the more traditional values of architecture, and I think we need to go back to this to the responsibilities of the architect. That we can see even in the Renaissance, or even before that, Vitruvius' 10 books of architecture. One of them is effectively just telling you, or telling the reader what the qualities of the architect should be, and the architect, in his eyes, needs to master everything from a true understanding of the proportions of the human body and physiology, to the proportions in nature, to aqueducts. And in a way, I think it's our responsibility to go back to that polymath way of looking at what buildings do. And I think we have a challenge. I think we have a real challenge. I think that the profession will change dramatically. I mean, I've been playing a little bit with ChatGPT. I suspect that you all have, and I just think that it's going to be a true. Things will change very much in the next kind of 10-20 years, and I think the role of the architect will need to evolve. But I think there's some certain values of the classical notion of the architect that are still valid today, and I think that it's a responsibility to face up the challenge of bringing back some of those notions. I think you are all graduating at a very exciting time, a very difficult time, but I mean, that's part of the profession that we've all selected. I mean, it's fascinating because it works at so many different levels. But it's definitely a fascinating time to be alive.
Thank you for very much for your presentation and for the special opportunity to interview you today.
Yes. Thank you. This has been a really a great opportunity to hear some insights and such an in-depth presentation. And thank you very much for your generosity with your time to engage in our
Thank you very
interview.
much for having me.
Much appreciated.
It was a pleasure to receive an invitation. Thank you very much.
All the best. Great. Thank you so much. I wish you a good flight as well. Great. You could join us on the road.